Erwin Manoyam approached me at the Franschhoek Literary Festival to try and do something for this, and I said it was going to be hard, but I really wanted to do it. I go back a long way. It's wonderful that this is, at least in part, being convened by my two editors of 30 years ago, known in the Weekly Mail originally under Thomas Aquinas's column as the fat editor and the thin editor. I've been on both sides of the fat and thin, so I think I can say that. Erwin and Anton, I go back a long way with. Actually, I go back 40 years. I submitted a cartoon unsolicited, and it appeared in the old Weekly Mail. Then they were my editors at the beginning, and the idea, the dangerous idea thing, really appealed to me as well. Of course, as a cartoonist. Avrenberg's framing of those dangerous ideas, I thought, was absolutely brilliant and hilarious. To do that, to get the dangerous stuff and the funny aspect of things in the way is exactly what one is trying to do and be as a cartoonist. So I'm going to take you. I'm going to go as fast as I can. I've got a lot in this talk, but I'm going to take you back to October 7 and my absolute angst as a cartoonist is how the heck am I going to draw anything? I just didn't know what to do. And it took me a few days, and eventually I landed up with this. I kept having these post-its that I was putting on my board, and I ended up just using the post and making a cartoon out of it. How to do Israel-Palestine cartoon that condemns Hamas's atrocious murder, rape, and kidnapping of many hundreds of civilians, which Hamas, backed by Iran, intended to incite maximum outrage and to inflame Israeli hardliners, whose response, and remember this is now only a few days later, has also been atrocious, bombing and starving thousands of civilians in Gaza, and whose regime, backed by the US, has persecuted Palestinians and occupied their land for over 75 years. And then the questions. And in essence, I'm saying, I don't know how to do the cartoon. And in saying that, the cartoon develops into this, which is there's no drawing except my board, but those questions are there. Those questions that we were all asking ourselves. A few days later, really, I mean, Israel, as you know, the response was brutal and right from the start. As it's always been. There's always been that essence that whenever Palestinians attack, if two Israelis are killed, the Israelis are going to try and kill 100 times or 200 times that number. That's what they do. So I then did, a few days later, I did this one. Righteous anger. I'm still giving them that leeway of saying that attack was an atrocity. And now war crimes. They are starting to commit what can be actually described as war crimes. And somebody says he refuses to see the difference. The Israelis, the arch-Zionists, the apologists, Jewish and other around the world, don't see the difference between anger at that event and war crimes, which have been committed for a long, long, long time. Now we're talking, so now we're into November 30, sorry, that was 13th November, that was the 20th of October, now sort of 13th November, and so there you go, there's a Gaza school, apartment, shelter, hospital, and then the little disclaimer that comes down, but unlike Hamas, we don't intend to kill civilians. And the nonsense that keeps getting trotted out, the idea that they don't intend, with the most sophisticated weaponry in the world, how can they possibly say we don't intend to kill civilians? They keep saying it, keep hiding behind that, and it's an obvious lie. Go forward to the 13th, now we're talking 12th of January, so it's a very few months after it, and by this time, it's the time that South Africa did absolutely the right thing and took the Israelis to the International Court of Justice. And South Africans, in terms of foreign policy, have been all over the place. And in terms of local policy and well, not so much policy, but local actions. The government has done so many wrong things and not done so many things they should have done. But this was something that we could all get behind and feel like we were doing the right thing again in the eyes of the world and in our own eyes. But of course, the idea for Israel, that the idea of committing genocide, a term that was actually invented at the end of the Holocaust to describe what happened to Jews. It's certainly not the only genocide, but to describe what happened in the Holocaust. Now, there's this Jewish and Israeli exceptionalism, which says we cannot be guilty of that. We cannot be included in that term. I really went hard on this one. It's not genocide. It's just my government's final solution for Gaza. Let me rephrase that. So I've done two things here that are very transgressive, very dangerous as a cartoonist, whether Jewish or not, but particularly Jewish. Well, maybe three things. I'm totally endorsing the idea that it is genocide. I am also using the term final solution, which I never thought I would do. Even as harsh as the cartoons I've done have been, I wouldn't have thought that I would get to the point where I use final solution because of the linkage to genocide. For me, it felt like I had to use that term, and I used it carefully, and I had long discussions with editors, and it was very, very difficult. But I'm also making a bloodbath, Gaza as a bloodbath. And of course, what many of you will immediately pick up is that I'm going to be accused of blood libel. The term blood libel, which comes out of medieval times, where people started to have these crazy anti-Semitic ideas that Jews would capture non-Jewish children and kill them and use their blood for ritual something. Those kind of things which have been spread around and have been the cause of pogroms, the cause of tremendous murder of many, many Jews over centuries. So this is one of the things that people, if you as a cartoonist or as a writer talk about the bloody murder, or you talk about the bloody genocide, you talk about use blood as an image, you are then smeared with this idea of being, whether you're Jewish or not, of using anti-Semitic tropes, especially the blood libel one. It is absolutely right up there at the top of things that they. So that's the one thing that I got accused of here. There was a Facebook campaign with this drawing crossed out and all kinds of things about me, and I've experienced this kind of thing many times. So this was one of the harsh ones. And the blood libel thing came up, and of course I was accused of being a capo. I'm sure there are many people in this room and in Johannesburg who, when you go against the grain, are accused of being a capo. That's another thing that is, it's a common sort of criticism from the right-wingers, from the apologists. They accuse you, the capos in the camps were the people who were Jewish and were assisting the Nazis to save their own skins, to get other people into the gas chambers. It's a terrible thing to be accused of, and it is a terrible smear. So this was a big one. Now, I'm going to take you back just a couple of months again. Look at the similarity between this cartoon, which it's one of those things we cartoonists sort of end up doing things, we the ones who are thinking about things in a similar way. There's that map of Gaza and my the character of Netanyahu in this bloodbath. And I hadn't actually seen this cartoon, but it suddenly made waves when I had seen it. It had made waves a little bit earlier because it's the cartoonist by the great Steve Bell, and he had been by far the best cartoonist in Britain for decades. He was immediately fired summarily by The Guardian after 40 years of being the top cartoonist in Britain and one of the best cartoonists in the world. When he did this cartoon, residents of Gaza, get out now. And there's this sort of scalpel with this. I love the fact that he's holding this scalpel with boxing gloves, so he can't do it good. He's just going to cut this thing out of himself, cause tremendous bloodshed to everyone, but also just, it's a brutal, stupid, unthinking thing. And Steve got a message, a cryptic message on his phone from the editors of The Guardian saying, "pound of flesh," which is from Shylock, Shakespeare. It's another trope. People in Britain and America and elsewhere, particularly in the sort of Western world, are looking, they're searching for these tropes to somehow. Now, Steve's not Jewish. Steve was then, he didn't know what the hell this meant. I mean, he knows pound of flesh from Shylock, but he didn't know the things with the blood libel and the pound of flesh. And there are many Jewish people who are against sort of Jewish dissidents and other people criticizing what Israel is doing, who are searching for these tropes at every moment. And he's like, what the heck is this? Pound of flesh. And he said he had no thought of that. It was never part of his thinking. He was thinking of the cartoon by the great cartoonist David Levine, where Lyndon Johnson had been for an operation, and they had so he had done this sort of operation incision mark of Vietnam on Johnson as he lifts up his shirt. That's what Steve had been thinking of. He didn't even think about this, and he got fired summarily for that. So that's what started to happen around these issues. Here's another one. I do a lot of stuff. I've had to edit a lot of the cartoons. I'm only showing you some of them, but this one about American support, it's very important. There's Biden when he was still there. Israel has gone too far. Time to express our extreme disapproval. Here's 25 bomb-equipped warplanes. Don't do it again. Biden was starting to say, we really have to express our absolute disapproval of what they're doing, and at the same time supplying Israel. And by this time, this is the same sort of thing that has happened on occasion with American presidents. They have sometimes expressed disapproval, but also just keep on funding. Now the genocide thing had picked up a head of steam. And there were many things that could be shown to be genocide. But then a particular thing happened, and I just thought I would take it another step. And that was, well, there you'll see death, war, famine. And there you see the World Health Organization declares Gaza a polio crisis. Finally, disease as well. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Those are the 4. Death, war, famine, and disease. Genocide, full house. It's every aspect of genocide is now can be ascribed to what Israel has been doing. 1 year after October 7th, release the hostages. 100 Israelis held captive by Palestinians for 1 year. 5 million Palestinians held captive by Israel for 76 years. So, of course, I got a lot of hate for that one as well. But, it is par for the course in what I do, and I've been doing this for a long time. At this point, there was a really interesting intervention by the great Art Spiegelman and the great Joe Sacco. Many of you probably know Art Spiegelman, Mouse, his Holocaust autobiography and biography of his father. And many of you may not know Joe Sacco. Joe Sacco is a fantastic cartoonist who also works in that genre of kind of journalistic cartooning. It's not graphic novels, because it's graphic journalism. And Joe Sacco has done books on Palestine. He's done the footnotes in Gaza. Look him up. He's absolutely amazing as well. Very different from Art Spiegelman. But they collaborated. Joe, as someone who's not Jewish, Art Spiegelman, who certainly is Jewish, and they produced this. It's a 3-page sort of discourse on what was going on. So I'm not going to be able to go through all this because I don't have the time, but it's really interesting to see. But again, there's an eye for an eye. There are all these kind of ideas that they're doing, and Art Spiegelman going through the kind of agony that I've and other people are going to do. How do you phrase it? How do you represent it? When do you call it a genocide? What are those comparisons? If you start using those comparisons, are you engaging in hyperbole? At what point do you say, no, the comparisons are exactly right? All of that. And Joe, from a very different perspective, the two of them kind of going head to head on some of these issues. That's the 3rd page of this 3-page thing. And again, they were using the 4 horsemen, and they're very disconsolate, both of them, after decades of engagement with these issues, to see where things had got to. Huge amounts of response. I looked it up. It was very hard for me to find something that I could sort of distill out, but lots of positive and lots of negative in the same sort of way that I have. But a very, very worthwhile thing to go and look at. I've thrown in some other things that are not directly involved. They're not directly about the genocide and about Gaza, because they're part of what has been happening recently, and I think they really contribute to the understanding of the sort of closing down of the space of dissent. And this one made international headlines, so you may know it. But Anne Telnaeus, a great cartoonist, I've met and become sort of friends with many of the people I'm talking about, not Joe Sacco, but all the others so far. Anne Telnaeus as well. I don't know her well, but amazing cartoonist. She did a cartoon. She was at the Washington Post, and she decided to do a cartoon. This is the rough. It's not even the finish. It's the sort of tight rough that she submitted to the editor of the tech giants, including Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and all that, kneeling in fealty to Trump. And a fantastic cartoon. The editor said, "We're not publishing it." She said, "Why?" Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. That's not what the editor said. The editor said, "We just had an article about some of this stuff, and this would be sort of repeating." Firstly, there's no connection between having an article and having a cartoon. I mean, they're part of a discourse. So that's a rubbish argument. And then as well as that, they were pretending that Jeff Bezos wasn't involved in their decision, or that they were not making their decision based on the fact that Jeff Bezos is the owner of the Washington Post. They stuck by their guns, so to speak, and Anne Telnaeus resigned very publicly. She resigned the Washington Post. You don't resign from the Washington Post. I mean, so she stood by her principles, and she's finding other places, other outlets. But that's part of what is happening in this sort of field. Now we get to the most controversial cartoon that I've done since October 7. And I did this very, very, very carefully, and again, huge amounts of debate with my editors. And now we are now talking 23rd August 25, so it's nearly 2 years. And never can we, of all people, be compared with Nazis. On his uniform, I put as much as possible as what can be compared directly. Dehumanization, ethnic cleansing, torture. And then you've got kill 50 for every one of ours. That's an actual quote. That's a quote from the Nazis. The Israelis go further than that. They go like 100 or 200. collective punishment, bomb hospitals, target journalists, target elderly, target children, target food queues, starvation policy, genocide, snipers kill for sport. That one, I can already hear the questions, even in this room, and I'm sure in Johannesburg. I have so much backup for that. Interestingly, when I showed you one of after about the second cartoon, as you can imagine, I'm sure many of you experienced this. Within your extended family, hopefully not your close family, but it could also happen, you're going to get people who say, what the hell are you doing in being this kind of dissident, in saying these things, in saying these terrible things that are damaging Israel, damaging Jewish people, etc. So one of my second cousins called me up and basically a long conversation, which basically she never wants to have anything to do with me again. She's definitely not in this room, and she wouldn't have expected her to be. Another cousin of mine, who may well be in the room in Johannesburg or online, a Jewish progressive, questioned this. Now, I'm going to also say, I had a walkout of my first Holocaust cartoon when I showed it in Johannesburg at the launch of my annual. I had a walkout of that one. When I did this one in Johannesburg, I had 2 walkouts. People who were just so shocked to see this, they just actually got up and walked out. One was very, very, very vocal. And he was screaming and shouting and saying, "Everybody should walk out. This is ridiculous. This is rubbish." And he said, "I used to like your work," and all that. So my cousin in Joburg said to me, "I'm with you until that last thing. Snipers kill for sport." He said, I said, "Have you seen the information on that?" She said, "I get a lot of information from Haaretz." Now, Haaretz actually published a major article on the idea that the snipers are at when it comes to the food queues or the clinics or whatever, the snipers, you'll find that it's documented. There are, like 1 week, they'll all be right arm injuries. And 1 week, there'll be left arm injuries. 1 week, there'll be knee injuries. Right arm, right knee. 1 week, left knee. And groin, genital area. Or just 1 week, they'll just decide they'll all be shot dead. Any age, any gender, whatever. That is the degree of, I call it bestiality. I have no words for that one. And that is what I included in the Snipers Kill for Sport. And you can go and look that up too. Haaretz has got it, as well as, of course, Amnesty International and all the other, all the human rights groups. Well, the kind of response I get from I've said some of it, but this is just one of many, many, many. I think Zapiro should have his family burnt and beheaded by Hamas fanatics. Maybe he will scribble differently. I could have pulled out like 100 of these, but that's just one. I'm going to take you to something by someone else who shares both the Mail and Guardian or the original Weekly Mail with me, and that's Stacey Stent, and who's in this room, which is, it's great to have Stacey here. One of the few female cartoonists, Antil Noes, I've shown you, but one of the few female cartoonists who goes all the way back to, her comic was called Who's Left, which I think could still be, you could still revive that because it is difficult to know. Stacey did this one as a poster. Knesset in Israel celebrates their imitation of Nazi laws. Death penalty to be imposed only on Palestinians. In 1935, the Nazis created many laws to legally victimize and discriminate against Jews. Palestinians are Semitic. The new Israeli law is anti-Semitism. So there's a little polemic she's engaging in at the end about the anti-Semitism, but the issue is to do this very strong cartoon. And Stacey gave me a little quote here. She said, "In the original drawing, I drew blood in the champagne bottle and glasses. I was, however, advised to remove the blood and replace it with champagne. Blood libel, my advisor cautioned me. You don't want them coming after you for that, and they will. I hesitated, but this advice was from someone with many years of progressive political experience, so I listened. I'm sure Stacey won't mind, and I'm sure Palo Jordan won't mind that I'll say that that was the person who advised Stacey. Palo was well aware of the blood libel smear, and I think that it was a good idea to do this particular cartoon. It didn't need the blood to talk about those issues, so I think it worked as well as it should have anyway. There was something else. Yeah, by the way, the capital punishment thing is the law enshrines capital punishment only for Palestinians. It excludes Israeli citizens, and only Palestinians are tried in military courts. Israelis are tried in civilian courts. So I think the point that Stacey was making was 100% right. Yeah. Okay. So now what I've done. Where am I in terms of time? Okay. I'm running behind, but I'll try to go a little quicker on this section. I'm now taking you back 30 years because these things, I wanted to do the post-October 7th thing first and then take you back 30 years and pick up particular points. So this is a cartoon from 1997 from the Sowetan, Jewish settlements in occupied Israel, a suicide bomber. These things have been with us for a long time, and I've been trying to, and many people have been trying to do these things for a long time. That was Netanyahu's first term as prime minister, right? The first term back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. This one is one that is very important for me. Israeli ambassador Ms. Tova Herzl enthused about the amazing similarities between Israel and South Africa. She must mean the old South Africa. And there's the West Bank. They're sitting in the West Bank, Bantustan, and there's an arrow towards Gaza, Bantustan, and there's a deportation list. Civilians shot this week, funerals. The similarity between Israel and apartheid, I mean, I was trying, again, you're talking sort of a quarter of a century ago, to draw that comparison. And of course, many people will say that Israel has far exceeded what South Africa did. I've done cartoons about that as well. But I just wanted to get this one in from a quarter of a century ago. And around the same period, I did many. At this time, I was doing a lot more cartoons, and I was trying to pick up on all these ideas that I felt needed to be out there. So this one, the idea, many people say, that's anti-Semitic. And you know, as you've heard that so many times, when you know that what they're talking about is anti-Israel or anti-Zionist or whatever. So I picked up on that. There's anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism, opposition to an ethnocratic, discriminatory Israeli state. Anti-Semitism, irrational, racist hatred of Jews. Different? Of course. But put your nose here and see what happens when you lose perspective. Now, of course, this was for an actual newspaper. I don't know if you remember those things with a bird in a cage, and you would put your nose there and the bird would actually move into the cage. So when you put your nose against that thing, these two things move together, but you have perspective, you see that they are completely different. So that was putting that idea across. The idea of dissidence, of trying to get the hell out of this herd mentality and trying to actually express things on principle. There's a cartoon I did also a quarter of a century ago. There's SA Jewish unquestioning support for Israel. Sound the alarm, dissidents are breaking out. There you see the first one towards freedom of conscience. There's Ronnie Casserel's. There's the thin version of me, about number 3 there. I go through phases. I have to draw myself fat or thin. At the moment it's fat. But this was really important. Of course, at the time there was a group called here in Cape Town called Not in My Name, and that was the thing. And as interestingly, around that time there was a Jewish Zionist, let's say a Zionist hate site, which got Jews from around the world who were seen as self-hating Jews, and I felt it's bizarre, and you know, with these sort of mindless people, it's sort of a badge of honor to be included there with Nadine Gordimer and Ronnie Casserels, and I think they still had Joe Slover on, but he had died already. They still had Joe Slover, and they had me. I mean, they didn't have Albie, for example. How the heck? But we were all rolled in bacon, which was the worst insult they could possibly think of for these secular Jews to be rolled in bacon. So, you do have to pick up the funny side of some of this nonsense. But, so there's that. Now, there's a little thread here of Ariel Sharon, because Ariel Sharon, well, my first sort of real stand was in 1982 when I was being interrogated by the military as to why I was refusing to carry a gun. And they said, why are you South African Jews such slegmense, like weaklings? Kyk wat jou medemense in Israel doen. And I said, you mean that you look what your fellow Jews in Israel are doing? I said, you mean the illegal occupation, the illegal invasion of another country by people who are already occupying land illegally? And then they didn't know what the heck to do with me. So, but that was my first sort of stand. So I didn't even know of the atrocities, the Shapiro and Shatila atrocities then. I just knew of the illegal occupation. And I knew that I had to start taking a stand. So it's 1982. Sharon really, when he came in, he made things so much worse. His provocative visit to the Temple Mount. So there's how it started. And Palestinian frustrations, that's just one. Then I started picking up on another theme that I've done many times. Passover story, let my people go. Sequel, let my people return. This I did at Pesach in 2002. And then the big one for me, the first really big one, 2000, also same period. Sharon, it was the invasion of the bombardment, the massacre at Jenin, and I did this cartoon. We have known pogroms, racism, and oppression. Never again. Never. And that one, so that cartoon, all hell broke loose for me. It was the first one where I'd really, we are talking 2002, again, a quarter of a century ago, and it was the first cartoon where I had expressly, very carefully, crafted a cartoon that really tried to show the comparisons. I wasn't just saying, the Zionists are Nazis. I'm trying to show something about pogroms, racism, and oppression. That is what Jews have suffered over centuries and centuries. And this is what they're visiting on other people, as the Israelis, not all Jews, but a lot of Jews do have over such a long period bought into this. And I do see the irony of the fact that Jews have been almost persuaded that Zionism was always the way. It certainly wasn't. And we're going to hear later about the Bundists, the socialists. There were many, many ways of thinking about how to improve the situation. It wasn't always about Zionism, but it has become that for large swathes of the Jewish community around the world. There's almost unquestioningly, and then gradually trying to pull people away from that and see that there have been other ways of thinking and that there should be other ways of thinking now. But this Jenin massacre, one of the things that also happened was that people said, you've bought into all the exaggerations. So initially there was the thought that there were 500 people killed, and it turned out to be a fraction of that. It was around about 60 people, something like that. It's still a massacre, no question, and it's still part of the same thing. So I don't think it devalues what the cartoon was trying to say. But the other interesting thing for me is that this cartoon started to get referred to in the Jewish community as the swastika cartoon. Look at it. There is no swastika, but it was commonly referred to as the swastika cartoon because people see what they want to see. And for me, that's another thing that came out of it. Okay, now I'm going to have to go even faster. There's this cartoon about American, I've mentioned American support. This is George W. Bush is the president. Of course, he had big ears, and this suddenly the big ear only it gets even bigger and listens to Sharon, but not to Abu Abbas, not to the Palestinians. So one little kind of anecdote about this. I couldn't go into get all the details because I didn't have time to go back and find every detail. But There was an exhibition in Bishop's Court, the American Institute of International Relations, whatever. They put a whole exhibition of my cartoons about international relations up. A visiting sort of Christian, really a faith-based group. I think it wasn't only Christian, but a faith-based group from the States came and they saw this. They were absolutely appalled, and they browbeat the organizers of the exhibition to take down this cartoon amongst others. And they did, without my permission. They took down, because these things are profoundly disturbing in terms of dangerous ideas. You know, for people to stand there and laugh at that and see what that's actually meaning is a dangerous thing, and that's where we as cartoonists keep doing it. And now it gets to something else that I've had to include because it's not part of the Gaza thing, but it is something that is huge for cartoonists. It's huge for freedom of expression. In 2006, the Danish, sort of a right-wingish Danish newspaper published the Prophet Muhammad cartoons, which had originally been published in Norway. Not many people know that. It wasn't just one cartoon. There were 12 of them, and it was from a competition. Lots of detail there, which I can't completely get into, but it caused a huge uproar around the world. There were people killed in protests. My editors all said to me, "You're not going to draw Prophet Muhammad, are you?" And I said, "Look, I don't do these things gratuitously. I'll do it if I have a reason. I don't want you to tell me that I can't do it." But anyway, this was my first response. A cartoonist, danger, religious minefield. And then I expressly wanted to show that it's not just Muslim fanatics. It's Jewish fanatics and Christian fanatics and Buddhist and Hindu, all of them. They're patriarchal organizations with old ideas that were invented by human beings, not by male human beings, centuries ago or thousands of years ago. And these things, it's just politics. It's politics. And every single one of these heads of these organizations has a little trigger on the top of their head, and you step on those things and you cause a lot of shit. And I do that. And that's what I wanted to show. So that was my first response, which my editors were all very relieved about, by the way. But that was, anyway. So, but a little bit more about this later, because I just want to put this in. This is 2006. Now we get to, also in 2006, Israel again bombarded Lebanon because 2 Israeli soldiers, so there again, the collective punishment story, 2 Israeli soldiers were abducted by Hezbollah. And then I did this cartoon. We are hitting terrorist targets with pinpoint accuracy. Israeli Defense Force. 250 Lebanese killed, 95% of them civilians. So that's the pinpoint accuracy. Then another thing, in terms of dissidents, I wanted to show this cartoon because we had a visit from the Shministim, the Jewish conscientious objectors, visiting Cape Town, and all the authorities refused to let them near the young people. So there you had the Jewish Board of Deputies, Herzliya schools, King David schools, and there were the Shministim and the South African Jewish youth who wanted them to come. They wanted to hear. We don't need no thought control. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall. And of course, the wall is the symbol. It has so much resonance. So there's that one. Then in terms of I just wanted to show one cartoon about the settlements. Again, it goes back a long way. So this one is now from 2010. You saw the one from 97. Here again, Netanyahu in his second term there, new East Jerusalem settlements and the peace prospects, those Palestinians driving that little thing in front of that construction vehicle. So now this is already, 15 years after the first sort of settlement cartoons. Now there's one thing that is utterly bizarre, utterly bizarre. In 2012, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies saw fit to host a seminar, so-called, of a supposedly sort of academic character. His name is Lance Katz. I've never heard of him. I don't think any... Have you heard of him? Okay, good. A few people have heard of him. But he decided that what he was going to do was to put together something that would show how my cartoons are like the Stürmer, the Julius Streicher's vicious anti-Semitic stuff that, Goebbels involved and Julius Streicher editing, the Stürmer cartoons. They hosted a weekend seminar where they showed the two things and kind of compared them, and somehow came out of there thinking there are comparisons, which is pretty bizarre. So there's this thing, sensitivity. Zapiro's Israel cartoons, are they hate speech? Lance Katz, September 2012. And they said Zapiro's conducted an active propaganda campaign aimed at delegitimizing Israel, the Jewish state, and the local SA Jewish community, whom he has identified as complicit with Israel. I suppose up to that point, I can't really complain. Using pre-existing prejudices and stereotypes, thus lending credibility to acts of violence and hatred directed at Israelis and Jews by association. Look at the stuff. This was one of his slides. Jews are all-powerful, controlling. Jews have the whole world in their evil grip. These are all from Stürmer. He did a whole bunch of them. I'm just showing two. And then these are mine. The quality that of reproduction of down the road is not so great. The Jewish state is bloodthirsty. That was Olmert, the butcher of Lebanon, going from Ariel Sharon to Olmert. But you can't really see that very well because the reproduction is not great. Devouring its enemies. There I did a cartoon knowing that those are tropes that people will pick up on, but it's just a standard editorial cartoon. But there, the idea of devouring enemies, I was accused of, again, indulging in the old tropes. Let's see, how am I doing on time? Whoa, okay. And then, okay, now I'm going to show you one or two more cartoons that I also think are important. Well, this one, for me, is just one of the best cartoons I've done. Israel's other occupied territory, the Veto House. So that one has been reproduced many times around the world. It's somehow struck a chord. 2014, another brutal campaign in Gaza. It's sort of a precursor of this genocide. I decided to do a parody of Guernica. I mean, in fact, this is almost not a parody. This is just talking about what Picasso picked up on about Guernica. It says, when the fascists deliberately killed hundreds of civilians in targeted bombings, Picasso famously expressed his outrage. And I've just done that as Gaza 2014 and the young Picasso. Then, again, I've showed you that the response to the Prophet Muhammad cartoons. In 2010, I decided to do a Prophet Muhammad cartoon myself. And I do think that it connects in terms of dangerous ideas and in terms of the shutting down of space, in terms of religious. The Israeli cartoons that I do are not religious. They're not about religion. They're about the herd mentality, about religious dogma that somehow informs a kind of exceptionalism. But these ones, of course, the Prophet Muhammad thing is about religion. It's about a particular fanatical kind of adherence to a certain aspect of religion. But I decided to do one eventually because I felt that for freedom of expression, there was a campaign, and there were meant to be 17 editorial cartoonists around the world who were going to do it, and I ended up being the only one this time. So this was pretty hectic. Other prophets have followers with a sense of humor. So this is it's kind of weirdly Jewish cartoon about Prophet Muhammad, the kind of New Yorker style, I don't know, kind of very, the psychoanalyst. People didn't also, some Muslim people didn't like the fact that I had the Prophet Muhammad needing to see a therapist. But, I'm a cartoonist, and everybody draw Muhammad Day. Okay, so all hell broke loose in the worst way. The editor of the Mail and Guardian at that point was Nick Dawes, and the managing editor was Hussein Khajeka, and Hussein was coming under massive pressure from the Muslim community, and they started to try to persuade me to come up and speak with the Muslim community in Johannesburg. I live here. And I said, are we going to do this every time a cartoon causes shit? Because then we're going to do this a lot. I know this is bigger than most, but they said, no, please, can you please come? So I went. It was the most, I arrived there with guys like in suits with talking into their sleeves, and then you get in the car, we're escorted by those, get to the venue, and I said to Nick, do you really need this? And he said, we're told we do. Get to the venue, there are guys in the bushes with camouflage. I said, now come on, Nick, man. Or we're going to hear the helicopters come like whap, whap, whap. I said, please, won't you send those guys home? It's just inflaming the situation. So anyway, they sent the camouflage home and they kept the guys in suits. And we had these 2 meetings. There were so many people that had to have 2 different meetings. All the imams were saying to me, so we had massive debates about freedom of expression. Yes, we believe in freedom of expression, and they loved the fact that I did cartoons about the struggle, and they loved the fact that I'm Jewish, I'm doing dissident, anti-Zionist cartoons, but you cannot draw the prophet. So this is a cartoon from the next week, so I had to show you this one. Now I put myself on the couch. Tough week? You have no idea. Didn't you realize the risks? Call me naive, but I thought the cartoon was quite mild, not like the Danish turban bomb cartoon, as you probably remember from the Prophet Muhammad thing. The issue is depicting the Prophet. It's that simple. That's for adherents of Islam. Why should non-believers be censored? And there's the contradiction of all those ancient Iranian and Turkish Muhammad drawings drawn by devout Muslims. That's all true. Go look it up. There's irony in being roasted by Muslims who supported me for doing pro-Palestinian cartoons that angered my fellow Jews. Are you sorry? I'm sorry I'm being linked to that juvenile Islamophobic Facebook campaign. And I'm sorry if anyone's linked me to the Islamophobia of the US war on terror or the burqa and minaret bans in Western Europe. But we're in South Africa. Here Muslims are empowered. Muslim clerics told me this week they're all for freedom of expression, except for drawing the prophet. Making exceptions for religious censorship is hard for a cartoonist. Can you live with the contradiction? I may have to. Then ring. It's my editor. Got to take it. Go ahead. I hope you're not doing another Muhammad drawing. No way. Just a 188-word Muhammad essay. So again, it was a little trick to pretend I'm not doing what I'm actually doing. But I wasn't depicting the prophet, literally. So jump to 2015, because out of that came the attack on Charlie Hebdo. 12 people killed, 7 of them cartoonists, around the same issue, that Charlie Hebdo had been irreverent and had done cartoons with the Prophet Muhammad and other kinds of cartoons, and it was an absolute atrocity. The big Je suis Charlie campaign happened then, where people in Paris and then around the world protested, and the red pencil became the symbol. I went into a state of shock. I actually, because of my own history, and I haven't said, I got 6 death threats for that cartoon, and I was beaten up not far from here, during our World Cup. I got beaten up very badly by a bouncer after being identified as Zapiro by what turned out to be a Muslim club that I was going into. I had no idea. I was just going into the good music. And I was trying to say, it's the World Cup. Let's try and leave these things for after. But they sent the bouncer after me. He savagely beat me up. As I said, I had these death threats, and I was very worried. So I did this cartoon. We killed Charlie Hebdo. And they turns around, and there's the Je suis Charlie. So they didn't kill Charlie Hebdo in the sense that Charlie Hebdo continued, but they did kill 12 people, 7 cartoonists. And I also thought about the strangeness of my doing these kind of cartoons, and people saying we're all with you and all that, and then people go home and the cartoonists or the writers or the singers or the activists or the journalists are still sitting in their unprotected studios or homes or work offices or whatever, and are vulnerable. So there's that. This is the last sort of this little thread that I have to pick up on, and then there's just a few more cartoons, then I'm at the end. I try to pack as much as possible into this, as you can imagine. So 2015, Charlie Hebdo. I come out of my shell, I start giving interviews again, but I then get invited to a seminar, a cartoonist conference, a conference where they're having cartoonists as well, in Kenya in 2015, by my good friend and colleague Gado, the great Kenyan, Tanzanian-born cartoonist. Gado invites me to this conference called Freedom of Expression and Security. It's all about these kind of issues. So I then just suddenly, then there's a huge attack in Kenya by Al-Shabaab, and a lot of people killed, about 250 k's from Nairobi. The conference was going to be in Nairobi, but everything felt like it was coming closer. A horrible attack. And I just felt this knot in my stomach. I phoned Gardo. I said, listen, I don't know if I can come. I mean, I'm this white, South African, Jewish cartoonist who's done a Prophet Muhammad cartoon. I mean, I'm sticking up all the flags at once. I said, what's the security like at the conference? He said, good. I said, what's the security like where I'm staying? He said, it's kind of non-existent. So I said, I can't come. And they understood, and I pulled out. So, jump 2 years ahead, I get a phone call from the Hawks. The Hawks phoning me, that's kind of weird. And they weren't nice people, by the way. But they were phoning me to let me know that there was an assassination plot against me. When? In 2015. What was the connection? Kenya. The Tulsi twins, who you remember, the Joburg people remember better than the Cape Town people, but the Tulsi twins were these two young guys who had tried at the age of 17 to go and join ISIS. And their families had sort of said, no, we don't like this, and told the police, and they'd been arrested. And then while they were sort of sitting fuming that they'd been arrested, they started making contact with an operative in Kenya and trying to figure out what they could do here. And what they could do was to target Jewish organizations and Zionist. Zionist and Jewish, they made no distinction, and me. And this was somehow then it leaked, but it was totally bizarre. It was exactly at that period that I was going. Then the story got out. It leaked out, and then Zapiro target for terror twins. The eventual, just in their court case, this got chucked out because it had been acquired by, what's the word? I'm losing one word here. When it was a sort of an ambush, and they'd acquired it illegally, the information. So they couldn't use, it was all true, but they couldn't use this in court. Steve, help me. Anyway, they couldn't use it in court. So that was the Tulsi. Sorry, I'm now I've got just the very few more. Because now I'll go quick. That was the last story. Rob Rogers, fired in the United States in Trump's first, so we're sort of coming back into now the mid-2015, 17. This is 2017. Rob Rogers fired from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for cartoons that were too critical of Trump. This was around the issue, this particular one around the issue of children getting separated from their parents. There is one more little story, and that is 2019, but this is really important. This one back to the Israel-Palestine stuff, and this is a cartoonist called Antonio in Portugal who did a cartoon of Netanyahu and Trump, and this one made big international headlines. The New York Times had published this cartoon after Antonio did it. There was a massive outcry in America, and it was accused of all kinds of things. All those tropes that I was talking about earlier were trotted out. I don't think this particular cartoon is. Look, there are two things that he did that are. You'll see he put a Magen David around Netanyahu's neck instead of the Israeli flag. So then they say Jewish anti-Semitism. That's the one thing. The other thing is he put a yarmulke on Trump, which I thought was unnecessary, and I thought added to whatever ammunition people could have to go for him. Anyway, massive thing. They apologized, but what they also did then was that they said no more cartoons in the New York Times. Cartoons had never been in the New York Times until Patrick Shappat, when the New York Times bought the International Herald Tribune. So suddenly Patrick Shapat's cartoons were no longer there. He was really freaked out. He's also a friend and colleague. This is one of his cartoons. I could see a huge Trump tower here. But Patrick was upset, and he said something which I think he shouldn't have said. He said, my cartoons are now out. No cartoons are going to be in the New York Times because of a cartoon that should never have been published. I disagree with him. I think there's nothing wrong with that other cartoon. Little nuances here. Here's one of my cartoons from the same time when Trump Seeks the Ultimate Deal. How much for the wall? And then here's a cartoon that I did again, wanting to invoke South Africa. This was around the Shireen Abu Akleh, the Al Jazeera Palestinian American journalist who was deliberately killed by an Israeli sniper. So obviously doing a sort of a Hector Peterson parody. This is when this is Trump's first incursion into Iran, which was clearly inspired by and following Netanyahu's. And then I've just done, this is a cartoon I did when Trump came in. I want to thank the American people for giving me another shot. So this is as he comes in for his second term. It's one of my best cartoons. I submitted it a few weeks ago to an exhibition run out of Washington, D.C., but to be in Ohio. It was picked by the jury from a few cartoons I sent, but then it was censored by the foundation, the Charles F. Kettering Foundation that runs the exhibition, that's running the exhibition. And then they asked me to replace it with this one, which is one of my favorites as well. Idaho welcomes white Afrikaner refugees. They look strangely familiar. They came from the far side. They all look the same. So, but I said no. I said I refused the fee, and I said I'm going to make it public that they've censored it because it's part of that censorship thing. Then my last cartoon, I've got two more images to show you, one of mine and one of someone else's. And this is one for World News Day. Press. I pressed. Over 270 journalists killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023 at a globally unprecedented rate of 12 per month. And then scores of journalists, I've listed all the other places where they're killed, but for speed, I'm just going to leave that. And then I've got one which, it's not the best reproduction, but it's really important to contextualize it. The great, there's somebody who Naji Ali is a great Palestinian cartoonist who some of you will know, and some of you know his famous symbol, the little boy who stands with his back turned, and he will never. So Naji Ali did this in 1969. He came up with this idea of the little Palestinian boy with his hands behind his back, who looks on and who is the symbol of Palestinian freedom. And he will never turn around until Palestine is free or until everyone has the right of return. It's a really powerful symbol. I'm sorry it's such a bad. I had to sort of just get this into the presentation at the end with the help of everybody here. But Naji Ali was then assassinated in 1987 in London. And it's interesting because he was being a cartoonist like me. He wasn't just critical of the Israelis. He was also critical of all sorts of things. And there were people who had his number, and they weren't only the Israelis. It wasn't only Mossad. It could have been from somewhere else. There's lots and lots of interesting stuff. Because in terms of dangerous ideas, he was talking about democracy, about principle. It didn't matter who he was criticizing. He'd really go for everybody. And there's a good chance that he wasn't even killed by Mossad. We don't know. Nobody knows. But the symbol carries on, and the symbol is everywhere in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in other places. People use the symbol of this little boy, Handallah. And I thought that was an appropriate place to end. I'm sorry it's taken me so long, but that's as much as I could plan it. Thank you. Okay.
So, I mean, this, of course, is all incredibly painful. And just thank you so much, Jonathan, for the time that you took to prepare this. It's just quite unbelievable, really, how much care and thought and work goes into every single cartoon. It's painful. It's